Hello, I'm Jay,
And I'm Robbie.
and you're joining us for episode 21 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we talk about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. And this is the second part of episode 21, where we're deep diving the WWDC conference from Apple and talking about everything that isn't the Vision Pro headset. So at this point in the show, we would normally talk about what has piqued our interest. And a bit like our Vision Pro headset episode, if you haven't gone and caught up with that already, we're skipping that this week because there's simply too much to talk about that came from Apple's conference. So this episode is going to talk nothing about the Vision Pro headset. This is all about everything else they talked about, whether that's Mac, iPhone, iPad, watchOS, and everything else they said as part of those upgrades. So we're going to run through this in pretty much the order it was presented in the conference, have a bit of a chat about what we liked, what we didn't like, what we think are interesting features, and then kind of share our summary at the end. So, Robbie, I know that we all watched that presentation because we were waiting for the one more thing, which was great. But there was a good hour or more of content before we reached that point. What did you take away, or what did you make of some of those early announcements? And I think they started with, and let me just get this right, the Mac and some impressive hardware updates. So I can run you through them if you want me to, but what was your initial thoughts on that?
The Mac, yeah. So it was the new chip that was released in the new version of the Mac Studio, which is the smaller kind of what's the smaller version called? The Mac Mini. That's what it is. A bit like the Mac Mini, but like double the size, and it has the more powerful chips in. They had a new version of that with the M2. It's the first time it's had an update. So it had all the M2 chips in there, and they released a new chip, which was the M2 Ultra. Great wording. They love that Ultra wording, which is essentially
making its way around, isn't it? Yeah, there's a rumor of the Ultra iPhone at some point, and I would not be surprised to see that later this year. It's
got to be
clever. So Pro wasn't premium enough. Now there's the
Ultra. But essentially, it's an M2 Max chip, kind of glued together, basically doubling the cores on both the CPU and the graphics, as well as many other benefits as well. So, extremely powerful chip. And then they also released the Mac Pro, which was the last in the lineup of all of the Mac devices to then adopt the Apple Silicon. And in fact, it took so long to get out because they did commit to doing it by the end of, I think, 2022, was it? I think they had a commitment. They had a date of when they were going to swap over all of their Apple devices to Apple Silicon. And there was rumors going around that Mac Pro was actually going to be sacked off the lineup. So that was an exciting thing that they brought it back.
So I got a couple of notes here. I think they opened with probably the least exciting part for me, which was the Apple Silicon 15-inch MacBook Air. Okay, I'm sure that's great. I'm sure someone's excited about that. It'll sell well, no doubt. I did make a note here, put in brackets, headphone jack ? Because I thought Apple were doing away with headphone jacks. And that MacBook, they made a point of stressing that one of the ports was the headphone jack. So that kind of took me by surprise a little bit. I was very much under the impression that they didn't want you using those.
Well, it's funny because on the MacBook Pro devices, they do have a headphone jack. And the reason is because it's got a built-in DAC. So you can do, so bit of a nerdy thing, but studio headphones.
Robbie, everything we do is nerdy.
This is extra.
That's literally the podcast, so that's fine. You nerd out.
Studio headphones, they have a what's called an impedance, which means that it needs more power to actually generate the volume. And so I think, I could be wrong, but the MacBook Pros have a built-in DAC which can power studio-like headphones, so you can basically do all the studio stuff that you'd want on the go. So I wonder if that's why they've done it also on the MacBook Air.
I knew I'd put question marks next to that for a reason. It's because you have the answer. Well done.
Well, maybe. I could be completely wrong. But there is benefit to headphones, especially if you're doing music editing.
Autocorrect here has changed fanless to fabless, but it meant I also wrote down fanless design.
Fabulous.
Runs almost silently. They talked about spatial audio, the M2 chip, and it starts at $12.99. So pretty reasonable, like kind of in line with most of the Mac hardware of that kind of level. Not bad.
Yeah,
That's what you're after.
just a bigger MacBook Air, which
Yeah.
I'm sure will appeal to the masses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Mac Studio with the new M2 Max chip. You also mentioned the Ultra chip, and quite right, I made the note here that it doubles performance of the M2 Max. 76 core GPU and can support 192 gig of unified memory. I can't imagine using a PC with 192 gig, but I'd like to try.
You'd
Mac
hope
Pro, you
it'd-
also mentioned, comes
Yeah.
with that M2 Ultra upgrade and allows for it allows 4 PCI upgrades that support Gen 4 audio, video, or storage. Mac Studio starts at $1999, and the Mac Pro starts at $6,999. So, we talked about the Vision Pro headset being expensive at $3,500. A Mac Pro is going to run you twice that.
But the same
and
chip
you
as
rightly
well. That's
said-
what's weird.
Oh,
Although
sorry?
you don't know what price the Mac Studio runs up to with the Max, whether the Ultra.
Well, that's it. It depends what you add to. Both of those were carefully worded as starts at.
yeah.
Which is a theme throughout this presentation. So that was it really for the Macs in terms of the Mac hardware. They did talk about the OS later on. We'll come to that. They then swiftly moved on to iOS 17. My kind of summary of this was some interesting quality of life improvements and some comms upgrades. But really, that was kind of it.
What did you make
Shall
of
I
the
run you
Journal
through
app?
some of the things? Oh, sorry?
What did you make of the Journal app that they're introducing?
Well, that was heavily rumored before
Yeah.
the conference, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's quite interesting.
Mm.
I'm not someone who journals myself.
No.
I might be inclined to give it a go. I think it was interesting to hear about the perceived mental health benefits. And let's be honest, we could probably all do with by taking better care of ourselves. So if this is an app that kind of promotes that and does it in a clever way, then I'm up for it. Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting. I did note that further down, and I think they mentioned that it uses ML to drive personalized suggestions based on info from your phone. That's pretty clever. So
Yeah.
photos, workouts, your music, etc. I think
I
it
like
could be
that.
interesting. Yeah, I'd definitely give it a go.
I've tried journaling. I've never really stuck to it as like a habit regularly, but I do recognize the benefits of it. Definitely the gratitude. So writing things down that you did during the day that you're grateful for. Because it's quite easy to forget, especially if you've had a busy day, the actual good things that happened. And then you can look back over it and see, actually, it was quite a good week, despite, if you had a bad hour or two at the end of the day on a Friday or something. So yeah, I do appreciate the journaling stuff.
I tell you what I quite like the idea of as a parent of young children is I quite like the idea of using it to kind of capture moments as well and create like a bit of a record of kind of like experiences that you've had. So, went for a long walk today. Here's the route we did on the phone, from your watch. Here's some of the great pictures we took. Here's a video of the kids doing something fun. And like you said, how did I feel when I was doing it? That could be quite special actually. And quite like the idea of that. I've not really thought about that kind of side of it. So yeah, I like the idea of maybe capturing memories and remembering key activities and key events with some of the more interesting data and things that happened around it. Yeah, I like that. That's a good idea. One of the things, for the things I focused on first was the phone and FaceTime and messages. So I quite like the contact posters. So these were allowing you to control your appearance as you ring other people, as well as how you appear in other people's phones when you share your contact card.
Yeah.
So a bit like your wallpapers, you could choose your background picture, you could choose your font, your text, your colors, and really customize how you appear on other people's phones. I really like that. But it was going to makes using the phone as a device, not the phone function, but using the phone even more visually appealing. And I will say that one of the things that was present throughout the presentation, and it's Apple to the core, that's a really bad choice of words, isn't it? Apple to the core. I didn't mean that. But it's very much visually pretty exciting, intriguing design. It's very much what they do, and that comes across, I think, in one of these features more so than anything else. It's purely a design piece. It doesn't do anything else, but it allows you to put your personality on your contact details so you can appear in a certain way. I put the end of my notes here, could be misused. So
I was thinking that. Or what's the safeguards for?
Yeah,
just
so like if you share,
everyone's phone.
if I start ringing you and I've decided to put something inappropriate on my picture, your phone could be in a meeting going off with a picture of whatever the hell I've chosen to be my contact card, just blaring off on your screen. So
That's a good
I'm
point.
assuming they're going to
Didn't
have
think
to
of
use something to, some sort of like machine learning to identify inappropriate pictures or something, someone's going to misuse it, aren't they?
Mm.
Unfortunately, but
And sorry, yeah, I
part of
was
part and parcel.
foreshadowing a bit there. I was jumping ahead to the new feature of tapping your phone on someone else's and getting their contact, and I was equally thinking about how they police that.
Yes, well, I think that sounds like that's going to be more triggered by the ability that you're a bit like your AirDrop now, like your decision to share rather than just wandering up and going, boom, there's my contact.
It sounded like it was just going to be tap your phone on someone else's, and that easy.
Yeah, it would be interesting, won't it? Maybe it will be. So we'll come to that though, because that's later on. So live voicemail, live transcriptions.
Yeah, I like that.
It shows you the message as it's playing, so you can choose to answer it mid-call. That's quite clever.
I love that. I thought that was a really good idea.
I like it. I'll be honest, I can't imagine I'll use it very often because I don't get many voicemails. And I don't think it's going to encourage people to leave a voicemail on the off chance I might be looking and reading it. I just think people don't leave voicemails anymore, or very rarely. But it will be nice when they do.
It feels like kind of a retro thing, the whole call screening where if you had like a proper, home phone and a voicemail box, and you would listen to hear if it's worth picking up the phone, and then you could pick it up halfway through the voicemail. That just doesn't happen anymore, because you don't hear the voicemail as they're doing it. So I guess it almost felt like a bit of a throwback to that. But I just don't think call screening works in that way anymore. So I thought it was a cool feature.
I mean, I just don't think many people leave voicemails. I get the odd one, but very, very rare.
Almost always sales.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Next one was FaceTime, leaving video messages when the end user isn't available. I like that because quite often I know that like we do it with the kids. We'll try and ring one of the grandparents to show them something in the moment, and for whatever reason they don't answer, to actually being able to capture it anyway and send it, and they can pick it up later. I really like that. That's a really useful feature. Messages, they put voice messages will be transcribed and the location sharing in line with the conversation. I thought that was quite interesting. And I really liked the check-in feature, which was to help people know when you're traveling and let people know when you get home. Now that's something that like Uber does and some of these apps do anyway, but just more generally being able to do that on your phone, and also being able to see things like when they aren't making progress and getting an alert that calls it out when they're not making the progress that's expected on that journey.
Yeah.
So you can make sure that something hasn't happened. Sharing their battery level so you can see if the phone can take a call or not, or is even still on. Things like that I thought were really clever. So I think from a sort of security and, like looking after your loved ones, I really liked that. Then they turned to stickers. So they talked about turning people into stickers and even video clips into stickers, which I quite like.
Yeah.
Again, some opportunities for misuse there.
I was going to say, I've been in some group chats where that could get really mean really quickly.
Yeah. So, that'll be interesting. And then I've got here the bit that you mentioned, so name drop for sharing contact info. I did write the same as you said, they just bring phones together. So I'll be interested to see how that works. I mean, I find this a little bit at home with the HomePod Mini, which I really like, by the way, and I've got into a bit of a routine now. When I come down to start work, when I'm working from home, I'll log everything on, and then I'll get my phone out and I'll pick a playlist and I'll just wave it near my HomePod Mini, and it transfers the playlist that I've selected into the HomePod. You might be thinking, why don't you just hey Siri it? But to be honest, don't start now. All the bloody iPhones are going off. I don't do that because I don't find that it's always that good, or that I necessarily know what I want to listen to. Sometimes I like to browse and be inspired by a playlist. But the fact that I can just bring my phone near to the device and it just hops straight onto there and carries on playing from that is, I think, it's really clever. So really like that kind of proximity communication and transfer of information. I hadn't thought about the implications for it. Can you imagine like going around a club and just kind of taking your phone near to someone's pocket or their handbag and hoping that was going to like ping and drop your contact into their phone? It'd be quite interesting to see how that works.
I imagine they might get away with it by needing the phone to be unlocked, at least.
Potentially.
Because that would be a good way of getting around it. But if someone happens to leave their phone unlocked on a table and then leaves it unattended...
They're going to come back to loads of... Now, the one thing I will say is that you have to accept them, don't you? So I don't know, maybe... I don't know what Siri's trying to answer now. I'm going to have all sorts of fun with that. I don't know whether or not you... Can you hear it?
Yeah.
my iPad's decided to start using Siri while I'm trying to talk. Anyway. You getting that?
Reliable as always, Siri.
Yeah, reliable as always. So, yeah, I captured the name drop thing. One of the things that I did notice, and this came up throughout the conversation, both in this presentation and the Vision Pro one, although less in the Vision Pro, was the constantly dropping in ML. ML does this, ML does that. We used ML for this. Now, ML, for anyone who doesn't realize, is machine learning. They were really careful, I thought, and not to talk about artificial intelligence in any way, shape, or form. Almost to the point of avoidance. And I think that was really interesting. And I read an article that suggested why that might be. And I hadn't even pieced this together, but it makes perfect sense. Apple have built their brand on security and privacy. And at the moment, there are an awful lot of sort of like scaremongering articles and press releases and news stories about the security risks of data and AI and where this stuff's going. And I think people are getting a little bit freaked out by it if they don't understand it. There's a lot of, we've talked about this loads of times. And I thought it was really clever or really intentional. They didn't bring it up once. And even when they talked about machine learning, they didn't call it machine learning. It was ML. So if you weren't really paying attention, you didn't know what ML was, you just gloss over it. If you're a developer, you know full well what ML is. You don't need it explaining to you. But it completely removed any need to talk about artificial intelligence in any way, shape, or form. And we had speculated before this event months ago, hadn't we, on the podcast? What will they do? Will they do anything about generative AI? Will they come out with any kind of response? They didn't. Completely silent. And not one mention of generative AI. Just lots of acknowledgements that ML was used in lots of different places to do clever things, but they didn't really dwell on it. And they again drove home at multiple points your privacy, your data, encryption, security. Did you pick up on that? Was that something that kind of stood out?
I did. Yeah, I did. The absence of mentioning AI, the silence was deafening. It was really obvious. You could tell it was intentional. I think it's partially because of the security connotations that come with the narrative around AI at the moment. But also, AI at the moment is such a hype word, and it means a lot of different things that might not necessarily be AI, that I just don't think they wanted to be mixed up in that narrative at the moment. So everyone, for example, thinks that AI is generative, whereas traditional AI is actually predictive, and generative is a fairly new thing. So to even say AI now in this period in time, people see it as a completely different thing to what it could be. This AI covers so many different things that there's a lot of assumptions that come with it, that they, I guess, didn't want to be mixed in with, which is, I think, completely fair. Especially as they're probably working on something themselves, and they don't want to muddy the waters between what they're developing for what is machine learning or AI on their devices for calculating whatever that it does on their devices now with what they bring out later, which would be like a dedicated AI product. They don't want to. They clearly want to just draw a distinction between what that is doing, the machine learning doing on your devices, compared to potentially a future AI product as well. So that's probably another reason why they've not used that term as well.
Makes a lot of sense. I also don't think you'll ever really hear them lean too heavily into the technical side of generative AI. I think if they ever do bring a product to market or integrate it, it will be Siri Plus or something to that note, or Siri 2.0, and it will be an enhancement to something we already know, and it'll be giving Siri the capabilities that it doesn't have right now. They've already removed, one of the last things I noted here was they've taken away the hey part of that command now, so it's now going to just be Siri, which is a little bit easier, I guess, for a lot of people. I think that all felt a little bit unnatural before. But I would imagine when they eventually do it, they will just integrate it into things you've already got, and it will just provide all that extra capability you might expect from it. You'll be using Siri Plus to search your phone, search your photos, and create special photo reels based on prompts rather than just based on some of the algorithms that they've already got in there that drive you your memories, things like that. I don't know if you'll ever see a generative AI product per se, or whether it will just be baked into their ecosystem. Across all their devices. Right. A bit like Spotlight search on your Mac, that will just get supercharged. Siri will get supercharged.
A bit like what Microsoft have done with Copilot is Copilot is a dedicated thing, but it's surfaces in all their different products. It's not just a dedicated standalone app that you go to for generative stuff.
Yeah, it'll sit over the OS. It's going to sit in all your core applications, isn't it? I think that's what this will end up being.
Yeah. I like the removal of the hey from Siri, because it does kind of put them on. It feels like they're almost directly competing with the likes of Alexa.
Don't do that one either.
Cancel.
Hopefully, we're not triggering your devices wherever you might be listening to us. We apologise if we are.
You've got headphones on. But it feels like it's trying to compete directly with that. Whereas you say the trigger word for that device, and you say something straight after for the command, rather than what you do with Siri at the moment, which is you say it to wake it up, and then you wait a second, and then you have to. So it's a bit less user friendly. So I like that introduction. I think it brings it on level with how you interact with Alexa, which feels more natural.
Yeah, I must admit, I very rarely use the voice prompt to start that person running. I tend to do it with the on-screen controls on my phone or my watch. So I use it a lot, but I don't ever use the wake up command. I just talk to it, but I press the button to prompt it from wherever it is. I don't know why. That's just been my kind of experience. It wasn't until I got the HomePod Mini where the idea of waking it with a prompt was something I had to do. And I must admit, I do feel silly, just as I felt interacting with anyone's Google device, saying hey and then the name of the thing that I want. Yeah. I don't use hey, even in the real world, I wouldn't go, hey Robbie, that's not how I talk. That's quite an American thing for me anyway. So it's not part of my vocab, and therefore it feels unnatural, whereas just saying the name, that's how I greet people, that's how I might talk to people, so it feels more realistic. A couple of other things just on iOS 17, just to round that one off. So autocorrect on device, I thought that was quite clever. So instead of, and I get really annoyed with this, autocorrect will change a word after I've typed the sentence. I've typed it how I want it, and then I don't realise it's changed it until I've sent the text and go, that's not what I wrote. And because it decides to correct it for me, I like the fact that now that you can choose to undo it so it'll correct it, and you can say, no, I'd already typed it correctly the first time, and then it will start to learn as well that you're doing it. So that's a must for me in terms of learning the way I write and not correcting things that I had typed as I wanted to type them. So
did you see Craig's little joke about that as well? It's like when you want to type, when you just want to type the ducking word.
yeah, that was really clever. And the last thing was standby, which was that kind of nightstand style rotation of the device when it's on a MagSafe charger. That looked really clever to me. Very similar to what you can do now with the watch.
Yep.
But arguably probably more practical because it's bigger and easier to see.
Yeah.
I will probably use that, to be honest, because I do have a MagSafe charging stand that would work really nicely with on the bedside table. So I'm quite looking forward to that.
Interestingly, it made me want to buy a MagSafe stand because I currently don't have one. I have one that lies flat and it's not MagSafe. But it makes me want to get one because I also agree that's a really cool feature. Both those last two features, though, the autocorrect and it also had like finishing sentences as well, which I've seen quite a lot in Google products. If you're typing an email in Gmail,
yes,
it often tries
like
to. I think that's a really good idea. But that is similar to a Google feature, but also Google for a long time have had that docking for your phone feature where it looks like a kind of a home smart display that you can use to control home devices, and then also call on the AI assistant to help you as well. I really like that, but it is something that Google has done for years. I'd be remiss not mentioning that. And also, just a complete side note. They did that.
Android user.
I know.
I'm joking.
They did it recently with I don't know if you saw, but Google released a tablet that it comes with the dock.
With its own home dock. Yeah, I did see that. It looks cool. I must admit, part of me was semi-tempted by that.
It does look really cool. And I wouldn't be surprised if, so they're doing it now with the iPhones. I wouldn't be surprised if they have something similar for the iPad at some point. It doesn't have MagSafe at the moment, but there might be some way that, if you dock it in some specific way on some specific device. It has got
magnets, though, because that's how it attaches to the smart keyboard. So it has got magnets in it. They're just not MagSafe. So you could do something like that.
Could do. And I think that would be quite cool, is having a tablet docked in some way that turns it into like a smart display.
Less beneficial from the interacting with your smart home, though, because as we'll come on to, that was one of the areas that was a bit lacking.
Yeah. Which is weird because it felt like it was
software things that they did.
The two things that they mentioned around kind of AI assisted and smart controlling things that I thought maybe they're warming us up to something that's more smart homey, especially with the docking and the fact that you don't have to say hey in front of Siri anymore. Really felt more like they were leaning into the home smart stuff. So I was surprised that they didn't say anything else.
Maybe they will. Maybe that'll come. But yeah, that was it for the phone. That was where most of the updates were from an OS perspective. And of course, a lot of those features kind of carry over to other devices. They then moved on to iPad OS 17. And my summary here was underwhelmed.
Yeah.
PDF's the most useful and interesting development, which as a sentence doesn't sound very innovative or exciting to me. PDFs are the most useful thing they did. So
all that meant is that you didn't need Adobe as an app. You could just use the notes.
basically.
Yeah.
So interactive widgets and being able to control them without opening the app. So kind of interacting with what the widget was saying, maybe closing in a reminder or whatever it might be. That all very smart, but doesn't feel, very much bringing iPhone kind of features and functionality to the iPad. Probably be useful, but it is what it is. Increased customization and personalization of the iPad lock screens, a bit like the iPhone. So being able to put widgets on your lock screen. Do like that. I mean, I do use that a lot on my phone, so I'm looking forward to sort of a bigger display where I can hopefully manipulate that a little bit more.
Yes.
Live activities from the lock screen, so things like Uber deliveries, timers, sports scores, etc. Quite like that as well. And then health coming to the iPad for the first time, which again, useful if you interact with that app a lot. I don't use it a huge amount, but I must admit it was quite good when the fitness app came over a couple of years ago. So, quite interesting. And then the only other thing they really talked about was the PDFs. And I put here ML again, models to identify places to complete fields, completing forms. You can sign with the pencil. Nice, I suppose. Also included in notes where you can annotate and share with others. So, I don't know. It felt a bit underwhelming. They did touch on the fact that Final Cut and Logic Pro, Logic Pro?
Yes.
It's called. The audio app. They did mention briefly that those had already come out and been announced, which we all kind of knew about and we talked about a couple of weeks ago. They touched on that, and then they just touched on a couple of improvements to Stage Manager. Freeform was getting some new drawing tools, and I put here a Miro style follow-along capability. So something we've seen in other digital whiteboard solutions. So looks like they're kind of investing in that and growing the Freeform application to compete with some of those other tools. But I mean, that really concluded the iPad, as well as some of the features we'd already talked about in iOS 17 carrying over. So as
not the journaling app
iPad
though.
user,
interestingly, I didn't see that was going to be brought over, and I expected it would be because it's. I think it's a more natural place that you would journal, something where you have like a typing surface.
Yeah, I'd agree. I suppose, but I mean, actually, there's no reason. I was going to say, I suppose it's because a lot of the data they talked about would be on your phone, but it's all synced across all devices. So there's no reason why it couldn't pick up on that.
Especially with the health app coming over. Because I thought that tied in quite nicely. You can now
probably
see.
Follow, won't it? It's perhaps one of those. If it does well, then they'll then look to create an iPad version and migrate it. Whereas I suppose it's double the investment from a development point of view in terms of creating an iPad version when maybe they don't need to.
It's. I mean, they've got some weird rules around what apps what default apps they'll make for the iPad. For example, I don't think there's a default calculator app. There never has been, and it's really weird. And it was the same with the weather app. I think they have brought it to the iPad now, but there wasn't a default weather app. So
weather's default now. I think the fitness one you have to download. That's
fitness
not on there by default.
Yeah. I do like the idea that the health app is there. I like the idea of the bigger screen to be able to display the data. I love looking into that stuff. The steps I've done that week, the exercise I've done, tracking my weight over time, things like that. I love looking at that stuff. And on a bigger display, I think it's going to look even nicer. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the widgets on the home screen. Did you see the little joke that he did? The little nod to the constant criticism that they've had over the years about the timers app. Did you see that?
No, I didn't. I don't know. I registered that.
It's a long-standing complaint of iOS not allowing you to have multiple timers on a timer. You're only allowed one timer.
I did wonder why they laboured on that so much. It was a bit of a weird thing to get obsessed over.
Well, it's a huge internet thing. Everyone just rips them all the time for it. But the zoom in and the joke that Craig said, it said you can now have multiple timers, and he goes, "This is truly a time of wonders." They're kind of self-aware of how long it's taken them to implement something like that, which I thought was quite kind of funny. That they're not taking themselves too seriously around that stuff. But yeah.
So then we moved on to macOS Sonoma. My kind of summary here was interesting changes to productivity with widgets on the desktop focus on gaming, but a bit disappointed by the Kojima announcement. That was my kind of high-level summary. So they started off with talking about the beautiful screensavers, which kind of carried over from Apple TV. And I must admit, I really like those on my Apple TV. They're really pretty. I don't know if you've seen them, but on your big 4K screen, having these brilliant kind of panoramic drone shots of these amazing landscapes or cityscapes is really cool. They're bringing that to the Mac. So
Yeah,
it's a nice
that
kind of
makes
pretty
sense.
thing to have. I really liked the widgets actually on the desktop and what they showed with that from a productivity point of view. Now I know, before you say anything, that you can do this on Windows already with third-party
The
tools.
Windows widgets are terrible though. The original
Yeah,
ones
but
anyway.
I did like the fact they were taking them out of the sidebar and they were going to let you put them on the desktop, and then you could interact with them. So it could be folders that you can drag and drop things into. It could be some of your apps that you can just access or get insights from. So that was quite nice. And also, I like the fact that you can have widgets on your desktop from your phone without needing the app installed on the MacBook, as long as the phone's close by. So it's using your mobile phone to bring through the data from your apps on your phone onto the desktop of your Mac without needing to install any extra software, as long as your phone's in range. So that was quite clever,
Yeah.
and just sort of shows the power of that ecosystem and the interplay that they're developing between these different solutions. That was quite a nice, sort of subtle, but potentially useful way to bring the two together. Then I'm going to hand over to you entirely here, because this was your prediction, and we argued over this on an episode, I don't know how many episodes ago, about gaming on Macs.
Yeah.
So you understand it better than I do, and you predicted it. So what did you make of the gaming announcement?
I was very excited.
And what was it?
Yeah. So a while ago we did an episode on gaming on Macs and will it ever be a thing, and that was specifically referencing that Apple native silicon, their new M chips, not fully supporting new games, and it's partially because it's a completely different architecture, and so games that would traditionally run on the Intel-based Macs will no longer run on there's Apple Silicon ones. And since they've launched, it's taken a while for the market to really develop games, adopt games for the Apple Silicon. It's getting better, but this announcement was really, really exciting for me because it satisfies a prediction that I made on that episode, which was that Apple, perhaps in WWDC, should release some kind of toolkit to help developers port over games from their current format to Apple Silicon supported format. And so they released a new update to Metal 3, which is their compatibility layer that you can use in the background to live, using APIs, convert the architecture for a particular game into something that's supported by Apple Silicon. And it now also supports DirectX 12, which is the latest kind of graphics driver that's used on Windows, which means that all modern games that operate on that will now also be able to make use of this Metal API, which is really exciting. And they also had Hideo Kojima on, which I know you're a big fan of. I'm telling you, this conference was tailored to you. I know you love Hideo Kojima.
It was. So a couple of things I also picked up on around the gaming piece. Did you pick up or register the game mode bit they talked about? So
Yes.
they touched on game mode, prioritizing CPU and GPU for gaming while you're using it, and also improving latency on things like your Xbox or PS5 controllers and even your AirPods.
Yeah.
I
thought that was really cool.
Yeah, like, again, really putting a focus on gaming where they hadn't done in the past. So further supporting your argument. I thought the Kojima bit was exciting at first. I was like, yes, Kojima's on an Apple stage, and of course they had Disney as well later in the day. But I was a bit disappointed, given that they just made such a fuss about porting games to Mac, that the game they were talking about porting was a game that's now a generation old in terms of console. It's a PS4 game. It's been ported to PC and done as a collector's edition already, and PS5, and now it's coming to Mac. I can't imagine there are a huge amount of people. There will be some, of course, but I can't imagine the audience is that big that's wanted to play Death Stranding that hasn't already found a way to play it on either what is a relatively affordable old console and now easier to find new console, or a PC.
Yeah.
If it had been Death Stranding 2 and announcing that that was coming to Mac at launch, I think that would have been a much bigger and exciting announcement. But to go kind of all in on the gaming, and then announce the sort of the big kind of figurehead announcement being a game that's now several years old, just felt like a little bit disappointing. I'm sure it's great if you want to play it, and I'm sure it'll play well, and that's all well and good. but I think if you're going to wheel out Kojima and bring him in because he's let's be honest, as a Metal Gear Solid fan, big lover of Kojima, I just felt like it was a shame it wasn't the new one.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I think it was less about the individual game that it was released and more about the strategic announcement and what it represents. There will be people on Mac that have not played it or maybe want to play it again on a Mac experience. So there will be people that buy it, but I think it's more about you've got Hideo Kojima developing games now for Apple Silicon as a means of convincing developers that this is a legitimate gaming tool.
That's a good point. I suppose you got to bear in mind this conference is primarily aimed at developers. It's the worldwide developer conference. So I suppose tapping into the developer community who would not only nerd out because they love his games, but also respect him as a peer from a development perspective. So I hadn't thought about that angle
because it wasn't just about we've developed this game. He talked at length about how he's always admired Apple and always wanted to collaborate with them. And that again, if you've got someone, you're a game developer and you really admire the work of Hideo Kojima, all of a sudden you're going to start to think, oh, Apple is now a serious contender in the gaming space, and I should port my games, especially now they've made this toolkit to make it easier.
Yeah.
I think it's more about convincing the developers than anyone else about actually getting that particular game on Mac.
I do remember someone saying that the one thing holding them back from purchasing a Mac was the inability to play games. So
who's that?
Does this also conclude your transition to Apple Silicon? Could we see you purchasing your first Mac?
I've thought about it. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, but it probably is going to happen if developers truly do adopt Apple as like a serious platform to develop games for. Then I don't see why not. Because at that point you've got Logic Pro on there, which is a fantastic recording software. If I was going to do any recording on a laptop, I would not go to Windows anymore. Just because I don't know, I had a pretty rough experience with it. And admittedly, I was responsible for bricking my own laptop. But the fact that I had quite a rough experience on Windows, and the fact that I know that Logic Pro runs so well. So you've got Logic Pro, and then you've got potential gaming remotely as well with extremely powerful hardware. I think I probably would be sold on getting a MacBook at some point. Interestingly, we talked about that compatibility layer, and it's not just for developers to use. It's similar to, if anybody's got a Steam Deck who's watching this, there is a similar thing on Linux called Proton, which is a compatibility layer that the users can just apply to games that typically wouldn't run on Linux and only runs on Windows. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But Proton is similar to what Metal is trying to achieve. And again, another fantastic Dave 2D video where it was only a quick 3-minute video that he posted about how he was on the plane back from the WWDC conference, and he saw someone on the plane who was playing on an Apple Mac. He was playing Cyberpunk, which is, Cyberpunk's been on there, I think, already, or, it could be over streaming. But then he was like, oh, we're on a plane, there's no Wi-Fi, so how is he able to do that? So he struck up a conversation with him, and he already had access to the new Metal, and he applied that compatibility layer to Cyberpunk on the flight so he could give it a go, that typically wouldn't be supported. And the fact that, users are already testing it and giving it a go, and he said it was running like 60, I think it was running like 60 frames per second. So it was working. And
interesting game to choose to try out there, because you could come across a bug and have no idea whether it was the original game or because of the Metal conversion.
I mean, you're true.
Because that game's riddled with bugs even now, although in another episode we'll talk about the latest announcements around Cyberpunk. But let's move on and wrap up the... I think it's really interesting. I mean, I said to you before, I don't go out, I'm not thinking about, I don't have enough time to play the games on the consoles and the things that I've bought to play games on, but I don't know, I might play something on the MacBook, maybe.
If you can, why not?
So, a couple of things to wrap up. Sonoma, so video conferencing, a bit boring, but they did a bit of work on improving the way that looks. Very much kind of leaning on Teams, but doing a slightly prettier version. So, having things like presenter overlay, there was some reactions too. So if you perform certain gestures, then it would trigger off like the emoji response, things like that. All very nice, nothing world changing. But if you use your Mac for kind of conferencing, and great. And what was interesting was that was going to work across the sort of core, the core of conferencing tools. So it wasn't like you had to use Apple conferencing tools. You could use those features in Teams, in Zoom, wherever else you might do your conferencing. Oh, excuse me. Then a couple of things then to wrap it up. So Safari was the last focus, fastest browser. Was brought up again. Improvements to private browsing, password sharing through passkey. You can share your passwords with other people. Profiles that let you separate work from personal. Now, I really like that because I use my machine to do some work, but then I also use it for personal. In fact, I'll use the example of this YouTube channel. So on my MacBook, I have my own YouTube account where I pay for YouTube Premium, and that's where I watch my YouTube. For the purposes of this channel, we have a shared account that we use for Jay and Robbie. Now, I have to keep, it's not a big job. I should put this out. First world problems, I have to switch account, to use either or. I quite like the idea of having a browser setup dedicated to the content creation stuff that we do, and a browser setup just for my personal general browsing, and being able to switch between them almost as like a dedicated workspace within a browser. I find that quite an interesting concept, quite a compelling one, and it's a bit like Focus, and using that to sort of quieten or bring to the fore apps that you use on your phone or your iPad. So I really like that.
Yeah, I use that feature quite a lot on Chrome and I think Edge.
Didn't even know it was on the Chrome and Edge. There you go. There's me being behind the times.
It's called Profiles. It's quite useful, especially for at work, having a separation between your normal account, say a developer account or a client account or something, where you've got to handle multiple logins. It is really, really useful for that. A whole new instance of the browser specifically set up with that login. So yeah, useful feature, I guess. Useful to see.
There you go. I feel super stupid for not knowing that already existed, but then I've basically lived in Safari for the last however many years because basically all I use. Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah, see, you try out that. Well, I don't think you get Edge on Mac, but you could try Chrome.
Web apps in Safari then was the last thing, which you can already do on your iPhone, but it allows you to create an app-like experience from a website. I quite like that. I could think of one immediate use case for that, which would be xCloud, because that's exactly how Microsoft got around the fact that they wouldn't allow them to put it on the App Store, was that they encourage you to create a web app, which basically just runs a dedicated browser window for xCloud. So that could be a really nice way to run xCloud on your Mac without needing to install any dedicated apps, which I don't think are available yet anyway. So you could run that very easily, and it would look and feel like a dedicated app. So, there's people that's useful for. I think it's great. Then they moved into a slightly odd jumble of content, which they bucketed under audio and home. So I put here some nice stuff, a bit jumbled, and it basically felt like it contained things that didn't warrant their own breakout.
Yeah.
And I did put the question mark, where's Apple Home? So they started this section with AirPods, which had a nice little update.
Before that, they started with a ripping guitar solo by Craig, which you've already mentioned was real.
Yes, in another episode I did mention that was real, and it is. You need to check that video out. Yes, after the guitar solo, they then moved on to talk about AirPods, and they talked about a new update which is coming to AirPods Pro, I think. They mentioned, maybe it's all AirPods, which was adaptive audio. So basically blending the noise cancelling mode with the whatever the environmental awareness one is called to give you the best of both worlds. It uses, again, ML to learn how you like your audio. And also, I think you mentioned this when we talked about on our headphones episode. You talked about Sony having a feature in your headset, which was like a conversation awareness.
Yeah, speak to
then,
chat.
If someone was talking to you, it would then lower the volume. They're bringing something like that in, so it would lower the audio and amplify those talking to try and create, I guess, a focus on the person talking to you. I thought that was quite interesting. It made me think of that episode and the conversation I had with you. So again, not an original feature, but I'm sure it'll be implemented well.
Yeah, I wonder how they'll tackle the because I mentioned that there was an issue with that in that if you stop speaking because you're listening to someone and there is a setting that turns on the music after like 15 seconds, then you have to start making random noises for it to work again. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear them.
But this one seems to. This was suggesting that when they talk to you, it does that.
Oh, okay. That's definitely a better way of doing it.
So it showed someone coming up to the person who was wearing the headphones and talking to them, and then it would kind of lower. So it'd be interesting because they reckon they've got that kind of spatial awareness, don't they, in these headphones? So will it know from the microphones the direction the audio is coming from, focusing on that, and kind of blur everything else?
Mm.
I don't know. Interesting to see. Then they jumped on from AirPods to AirPlay, supporting in hotels.
Yeah, weird.
So, I'll be honest, this will be quite useful for me because I have found myself on a few occasions in a hotel for work, and I've been like, oh, I watch a YouTube video, got my iPad out, and then the TV only supports Android. There's no way to cast to it, or the TV hasn't got any kind of digital features or internet capability, and it's just a standard television. So if hotels are going to start supporting AirPlay and I can seamlessly sort of throw content up onto the TV, I quite like the idea of that.
Yeah,
So,
that's the thing though, is it still relies on the hotels actually adopting that as something that they're going to have in their TVs, right? So if you didn't have it before, I think that the likelihood you're going to have it now is probably not that high.
well, they did. I can't remember what the stat was because they didn't bother writing it down, but they did mention how it's being rolled out and how many different hotel chains are going to start supporting this and how that's going to be kind of advanced more and more. So I guess it'll be one of those things that probably just become fairly standard. Although how they're going to go about it, I don't know, because you would assume they have to put in loads of new TVs that have either got it baked in, or they have to go around putting Apple TV equivalents into all rooms, or who knows how they're going to handle that. But
maybe
one to look at. And then CarPlay also got a small upgrade, which I must admit I really liked, which was SharePlay. So I don't know if you remember or ever utilised iTunes DJ back in the day. We really loved it in our house. We used to have house parties, and iTunes DJ basically allowed you to run iTunes on like your Mac or whatever your Windows, and then you could from your phone you could join the party, and then you could pick songs from the library, queue them up, and kind of the whole party could drive the playlist. And we used to have friends come over, they'd hop on the Wi-Fi, we'd invite them all to do that, and they would just sit there and curate the playlist for the afternoon if you had a barbecue or something like that. They took it out, unfortunately, for no particular reason, and there's no suitable equivalent. This seems to be it, but for CarPlay. So this is aimed at people on road trips. All your passengers can join in. They can control the music. They can add music and things like that as you're going along, which is actually quite useful because CarPlay is great. But once your phone's connected to it, it's often it's either on a wireless pad or it's in a glove box, or it's not easy to pass around the car, and you might not want to pass your phone around the car while you're driving. So the idea that people can hop on and kind of put music into a queue and listen along with you, I like that. But it was interesting.
Yeah, we actually had that very problem when we were driving around the US for the honeymoon, and the car supported CarPlay, and I had the maps up on my phone, but I don't have the best playlists out of me and Christina. So Christina wanted to play her music, so we actually had to connect her phone. So you can do it so you can connect CarPlay for CarPlay, and then you can connect a separate phone for audio. It was a right faff, but we managed to figure it out as part of that journey. But it would just be easier if you could do, like, as you say, like a party and then start adding music. The other anecdote on this is actually, it reminds me of, and something I do quite a lot with Christina and her family, is whenever we have a get together, often we load up YouTube and we all connect to the TV on YouTube and start loading up music videos and stuff and pass it around and do it in like a queue and things like that. So it reminds me of that, actually, and we really do enjoy that. So yeah, I think that's a really cool feature to add.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last thing they mentioned in this space was tvOS, which never really gets enough love. But so a new controller design for Siri's remote. Yeah, great. An iPhone can now locate that Siri remote, so you can use kind of the AirTag style functionality to locate it, find my remote. Useful, I suppose. I must admit there's been a few times when we've lost ours. That would have been quite handy. The one main feature here was FaceTime on Apple TV. So it uses the continuity camera on iPhone, which I have to say works really well on Mac, to transmit the video and the sound, or the microphone sound, and then the TV shows you the group. So the way they showed it happening in the demo was that the TV, the person who was running it put their phone in front of the TV, kind of under the television with the camera pointing to them, and then they carried on their FaceTime conversation with their family on the big TV. Quite useful, quite like that. We are an Apple TV house. All the TVs in our house are Apple TV driven. We don't have Sky or anything like that. So we could absolutely take advantage of that. and we do use my other half and the kids use FaceTime a lot with the grandparents, so that could be a really nice way to make it more inclusive. Because FaceTime tends to be a weird experience when someone's on a FaceTime call and you're all around them around the dinner table, and you're like, come and say hello to your nan, and you kind of shove your head in their face, and you're like, hey. So I like that. And then they moved on to the last section, really, of the presentation prior to the Vision Pro, which was the WatchOS. So they made a big fuss of it being the 10th iteration, and they'd done a big app redesign, and the Smart Stack had been redesigned. There was a focus on well-being, but they did stray away from the watch a little bit, which was strange. So the main thing that they called out were the visual redesigns. Snoopy getting some big airtime.
Yeah.
Don't know why. I mean, I don't dislike Snoopy, but it seems a slightly strange and irrelevant character to bring to the device.
Didn't they do a Mickey Mouse one as well?
They've done Mickey and Toy Story, which I would agree with you are equally odd. So yeah, but Snoopy, but I don't think Snoopy's owned by Disney, is he? So I just assumed there was like a relationship with Disney for Mickey and the others, but I don't know who owns Snoopy. And they didn't just bring one watch face as they have with Mickey and Minnie. Like, there was about 5 or 6, and they were all interactive, and they would do things with the weather and all sorts of weird stuff.
Yes.
I mean, they look lovely, don't get me wrong, and I do like Snoopy, but I just thought it was a bit of a strange one to focus on as your 10th anniversary kind of big kickoff.
I think it's Sony that owns the rights to Snoopy. Could be wrong.
Even weirder then. Even weirder. Anyway, so Snoopy was in there. They talked about widgets in the Smart Stack at the turn of a dial, which I really liked. Again, using ML, which came constantly.
ML.
They've also redesigned. They didn't talk about it in the presentation, but I saw it afterwards. The current view that you can navigate your apps on your watch, which is that kind of scrubbing around that massive app. Yeah, I'm not a massive fan. Apparently, that's got a slight tweak now, and it's now effectively on a scroll reel.
Yeah.
So instead of having to go left, right, up, and down, you just go up or down, and they are kind of all organised in the same way, but you can sort of scroll through them instead of having to navigate around.
That makes way more sense.
Yeah, which will be a whole lot easier to interact with. Cycling of focus. So when you're using it to cycle, it does multiple things. So first of all, you can now connect it to power and cadence Bluetooth devices. So I'm guessing that's the thing if you're a cyclist. I am not. It also pairs with your iPhone to show your workout on the phone while you're moving. So if you, obviously you're not going to be on cycling and then keep turning your wrist to look at your watch. So a lot of people will have their phone kind of mounted on the front of their bike. So the idea is it will transmit the key data that you need to see to your phone. So now you can connect your fancy devices to your watch and then channel all of that data through your phone. So
I saw you can do things as well, like
good.
miles per hour, which is also quite useful. There's a couple of different screens I think you can get on your phone, not just the.
Yeah, I used to have on my bike years ago, like a little digital computer that would tell you all sorts of things about your speed and your cadence and stuff. I guess it's that channel through your phone, isn't it? Which makes perfect sense. That looked good. If you're a golfer, they had some features around golf shot detection using wrist movements, acceleration and deceleration. Frankly, couldn't give a monkey's about that.
You're not a golfer?
No, not a golfer, not a fan. Mental health, then, they talked about logging your mood and your emotional state as part of the mindfulness app, and that also carried over to phone. And it was basically allowing you to keep that log. So I guess linking into that mental health piece with the journal app as well is allowing you to kind of capture your mood as it's prompting you as you're feeling it. So you can track, when you were feeling good and what was going on, and when you didn't feel so good, and look for trends. Yeah. Again, that made a lot of sense.
Uses ML again to tell you about the trends. If you're at risk of depression, or if you're more depressed on days that you don't exercise, or if you didn't get enough sleep, that kind of thing. It's I actually think that's a really powerful feature. It's quite clever. I'm looking forward to seeing that actually in action.
And then they mentioned as part of that, actually, the standardized assessments in the health app linked to that, so you could take regular check-in questions to sort of check your state of mind, and then again, like you said with the ML stuff, it will then tell you whether or not you might want to seek some support, or you could do with some help. And then the last thing that they mentioned was vision health, which was odd because this was all still part of the watch presentation at this point, but it really does veer away from the watch. So it uses this is about trying to reduce myopia. So it uses it tracks the time in daylight via the Apple Watch. And it's aimed at kids. So then I did make the note here that it means that kids need Apple Watches. That's expensive.
Is that a thing?
What?
Is that why? I thought that was any device that this applied to, not just the watches.
No, so it was the watch they were pitching this for at the time, and they were showing all the
Yeah.
kids running around with Apple Watches, which is expensive. There's also a screen distance app, which is
That's what I was thinking. Sorry.
separate feature, and that tells if the child is holding the device too close to their face, using the camera on the device. Now that will be really useful for me because I've got 2 children with 2 iPads who do, I think, at times have them far too close to their face. But of course, telling them to move away from the iPad, it always results in an argument. So we end up wrestling to try and get that distance to be something that feels more appropriate. So if I can make it so the devices just tell them or stop showing the content if they don't move it away, that'd be great. So I'm all up for that because I think that's very much needed.
They're two great. So the myopia one was more about having 120 minutes outside, right?
Yeah, it's exposure to daylight. Yeah,
exposure to daylight. Yeah. Okay.
But the only thing that I thought was odd with that was that it uses the Apple Watch to track. I get that it needs to be out all the time. That's expensive, and also probably not that useful in countries where you might be outside, but not necessarily in a t-shirt, because unless it can read that light through a jumper or a thick jacket, as we often find in the UK, we need to wear because summer is
very British problems.
Such a short period of time. Yeah, then I don't know, but a great thing to bring in. Certainly something we should be encouraging kids to get more of. I'm fully in support of it. I just wonder how practical it is when it means your children have to have Apple Watches. I wouldn't put an Apple Watch on either of my 2 kids at the moment. My daughter's got a Fitbit, a very rugged little tracker, but unless they bring out an Apple Watch Kids, which is wrapped in silicone and rubber and indestructible, there's no way I'm putting a £300-500 watch on one of my kids. But a bit like the Vision Pro headset and some of these other machines we talked about, there will be people out there that kind of money is not a problem for. So
yeah, I was going to say actually, when I was on holiday, I did see kids running around with Apple Watches on.
Did you? Wow, maybe it's a California thing then.
Maybe
they have sunlight outside there, and they don't wear t-shirts, so it's so that you can track it. So we talked about this earlier, but I guess at the end I kind of drew a summary, which was nothing overwhelming, some nice quality of life stuff in there. Enjoyed it. Again, iteration, not innovation. I mentioned the whole ML piece, and that that they very much avoided AI. And I thought it was a very good presentation, which was ultimately trying not to get in the way of what was to come, which was the massive announcement, of course, around the Apple Vision Pro headset. So they were very clearly kind of getting some regular and useful updates out there, but they weren't trying to blow anyone away. There's nothing in there that they wanted to risk getting lost in all the noise.
Yeah.
There were just some good quality of life improvements that will be nice when they come.
Yeah.
Nothing I'm massively excited for, though, to be honest.
I was expecting to see a reason why they announced Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro before, but I don't think I saw it. I think
no, they did touch on the announcement, but they didn't talk about why it had already been announced. But I think that was just for that reason. I think it was to not get lost in all the noise and give it a moment to stand out from the Apple Vision Pro, because all the conversation that I've seen has been Apple Vision Pro.
It's true. That is true. I just feel like it would have been. I can even picture the advert for it now, or the promo for it, where they had a bunch of music producers having a go on the iPad, or a bunch of videographers having a go on the Final Cut Pro.
But that exact video exists. It was on the announcement page when they did it. So they did do a compilation video of kind of creators using it. But yeah, I mean, why they didn't play that as well, I don't know. It would have been nice, easy filler. I have downloaded Final Cut Pro.
Have you?
On the iPad? I haven't really had a chance to properly use it yet because I need a project. So I need to go and shoot some video now and then have a reason to start playing with it. But yeah, it looks decent.
Yeah, I've seen mixed reviews of Logic Pro, but I do fancy giving it a go. I mean, it's not that expensive, so I could always cancel.
You get the first month free anyway, I think.
True.
Or first 14 days or something like that.
Yeah.
What would be your summary, Robbie? I gave mine. What was your takeaway after watching that?
Yeah, I think there wasn't a lot of updates when it comes to the phone and iPad. There were kind of expected tweaks. A few, I guess, the addition of the journaling app was nice. The iPad ones in particular was more just bringing it up to date with the features that have been brought out on iOS, which are appreciated, but it feels like it could have been brought out earlier, or did it really need an announcement? It feels like it's something that could have gone under the radar, really. But yeah, I'm really excited about the gaming on Mac, of course. It reaffirms my prediction that gaming on Mac is going to be a thing. and maybe it'll be a viable reason for me to get one in the future.
You just mean it's giving you a good excuse.
A good excuse is what I need.
So,
But yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I thought that the rest of the updates were kind of light, with the exception of the additional hardware on the Studio and the Mac Pro. The iPad Air was a bit meh. I think it's going to appeal to a lot of people. I often thought that the 13-inch MacBook Air was always going to be a bit too small if I was ever going to get something like that. So I do think that'll be a bit more appealing to some people. But yeah, I thought it was a great event overall. I mean, all the excitement was on the headset, but I do think there was some good stuff in there before that as well, specifically around gaming on the Macs. I was very excited about that.
I think as well, one thing that's worth calling out is that they did a fantastic job in terms of diversity as well. There was lots of different sort of faces and voices involved in the presentation. They also multiple times panned to shots of Apple Campus and that rainbow that they've got set up at Apple Campus. So I thought that was really good that they didn't sort of shy away from any of that, and they've sort of fully embraced the Apple perspective. And right, if that will aggravate some people, tough.
Yeah,
I thought it was the right thing to do, and from a company that sort of is very much built on its culture and its values, I think that was also really nice to see just how many different people they gave the stage to, and also gives you an idea of just, I mean, I know it's only scratches the surface, but of the sheer volume of people involved in bringing all these different products to life.
Yeah.
In events gone by, there's been just 4 or 5 faces that have kind of presented everything, whereas there was loads of different people involved in bringing this to the fore, and lots of different passionate voices, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it goes to show that, I mean, it's a huge organization, Apple, and it's sometimes easy to forget when you see events like these and you only see a handful of people, but the people that you saw on there will have huge teams, absolutely huge teams.
Yeah, definitely.
So it is really good to see the diversity on the stage, but also the different teams are individually represented by their leads as well, which I think is a nice way for the teams that worked on these products and software to be appreciated as well.
Yeah, definitely. We're not going to touch on the Vision Pro. That is for an entirely separate episode. We've done a double episode this week to try and allow you to avoid it if you've had enough of listening to the Vision Pro, or you wanted to deep dive this stuff instead. If you do want to find out more about our thoughts on the Vision Pro, then please hop over to the other episode that we've recorded and have a listen to that and share your thoughts with us. Thank you for joining us. Please, as always, like and subscribe. Do all the good social media things. Prompt us, subscribe to us, comment on everything. If you think we've got anything wrong, or you think we've missed anything, because I tried to capture all the different points that have been talked about, I'm bound to have missed one or two. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you on episode 22.